Since I was young, sign language and deafness has always been a big part of my life. I learnt sign language at a young age to be able to communicate with my dad, who has been deaf for the majority of his life. My mom is also a British Sign Language interpreter, so BSL is very prevalent in our household. However, despite being a child of a deaf adult, or a coder, growing up I never really immersed myself in deaf culture or know much about deaf history, much like many other hearing people. So today I'm going to be interviewing people who are immersed in deaf culture to get their opinions on how, as a community, we can work to be more considerate and understanding of deaf people and the barriers they face, and how hearing people can become more immersed in deaf culture. The first recorded evidence of sign language is in the parish handbook at St. Martin's Church in Leicester. It describes a wedding in 1576 where the groom, Thomas Tilsey, uses signs to express himself. Since then, sign language has developed into multiple languages all over the world that many people, deaf and hearing, use to communicate. Today, I have spoken to 4 deaf people to talk about their experiences navigating life. But how can deaf people communicate with hearing people that don't know sign language? Well, some people have dedicated their work to researching and learning how to become registered sign language interpreters. For as long as there has been deaf people, there have been interpreters to help bridge the gap and help communication between deaf and hearing people. One of the earliest examples of people using interpreters in the legal system was a case in 1324. John de Orleton, who was a deaf man in Nottingham, went before the courts to request that his hearing brother-in-law Warren de Rouge be appointed as his legal guardian. John's wife Isabella, who was known as the family's interpreter, helped this arrangement take place. Registered Sign Language Interpreters, or RSLIs, are professionals verified by the National Registers of Communication Professionals working with deaf and deafblind people, or the NRCPD, and they work in sign language interpreting and translation. They are highly skilled in sign language and another signed or spoken language and act as a bridge between deaf and hearing people. I interviewed 5 BSL interpreters to talk about what they do and why they chose to become interpreters.
I was kind of always interested in the language, at the very least, for quite a while, and I was doing a politics degree initially. And I'd been told by my college tutor that basically there was no point in doing anything to do with sign language because deaf people don't work, or she said, deaf people don't work, so you wouldn't be working with them. Sign language isn't a viable career choice because what would you be doing with it? Because when deaf children become adults, they're not doing anything. And because I was like 16, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, you're an adult, I trust you, because I didn't know anything other than that. And when I was in my last bit of my degree, last bit of my first year of my degree, there was a group of deaf people that all came in. So I was studying for my final exam, and I was like, hang on a second, that feels like not what my tutor had said. And so I went over to ask the librarian, like, there was a guy with them who had a badge, and I was like, who's that? Is that like a teaching assistant, or like that looks like a job? What's that job? And they were like, oh, it's an interpreter. And I was like, great. And I literally did my exam half an hour later and then quit and went into interpreting because I was like, do you know what? It's super interesting, and why not?
So for me, not having any deaf family, I've always thought it's an amazing privilege to be allowed into the deaf community, and particularly because of the power imbalance and the appalling oppression that deaf people have been through, that they will welcome hearing people without any deaf connections in, just to help them learn the language. And I've really found that extraordinary, actually. Yeah, I mean, I've had an amazing journey, really. Then I moved up to the Midlands and went to the local deaf club, and we used to go camping and all sorts of events. So, yeah.
I think BSL is a very important tool. I tell people all the time that it's worth even just learning level 1. And the reason that it is important is because deaf people live among us everywhere. And I think it's important that they have the opportunity to access conversation, to socialize, to access information while you're out and about. I can't count how many times I've been at a train station where there's been a change of platform or a change of train, and there is a deaf person there who isn't able to access the information, and I happen to be there and I can pass it on. But I think it's so important. So I always say to people, it's worth at least learning level 1, and if you can spell, then you can spell any word that you need to say to communicate what it is that you need to say in that situation, or just to make a new friend and start a conversation, on a train or out and about.
Well, that's a very loaded question, only because I'm doing my doctorate, so I'm doing a PhD study looking at interpreters of colour in the UK, because we experience things like racism, prejudice, microaggressions from both sides, from the hearing and deaf communities that we serve. So my answer would probably be different from my colleagues.
I think as an interpreter, the barriers that I face personally could possibly be having enough adequate time and access to prep to be able to do my job, and also possibly there are occasions when there have been maybe racist incidents. I wouldn't say that's a barrier, but it makes you kind of reluctant and maybe kind of put off with working with specific people or in specific domains. Yeah, I'd say that those two are the main barriers. I think getting adequate prep, especially having ADHD and being dyslexic, like I need to be able to prep, and using software and technology. So if I'm out doing a job, as long as I can have my phone or some kind of technology to support me to be able to do my job. And just making sure that I have really good co-workers that are understanding, empathetic, supportive, and because I try to give that as well when I'm co-working.
Despite the fact that deaf people make up 6.1% of the world's population, there is still very minimal consideration of deaf people and their lived experiences, as well as many misconceptions on deaf people's abilities. Many people think that there are a lot of things that deaf people can't do, such as listen to music, drive, work, or even speak. So, how can we, as a community, educate ourselves on deafness and BSL?
So I think the first thing you could do is maybe go and find a course to do, preferably with a deaf tutor, not a hearing tutor, because obviously a deaf tutor will give you the richness of the culture and the understanding of what it is to be deaf and what it is, to be a part of the community. And then I would say once you've learned BSL enough to have some good conversations, basic conversations, I would recommend going into the deaf community and just immersing yourself, and not to do it as a kind of go in there, learn and leave, but to go in there with the aim to be, a part of the community, to respect the community, respect deaf people and their space, and not for it to be a completely learning environment where you take away and then you leave, but something that you can be a part of, give back to, and be a supportive person within the community.